DFS. It is Friday, November 12th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 10 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And this podcast is sponsored by our partners at Fanshare Sports. Fanshare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at fansharesports.com. Jared, Week 10, QB, hit me with what you like for cash.
I got two options here. One higher price guy, one kind of middle price guy. And I think the direction you go depends on what you want to do at running back, which we'll get to next, obviously. But up top, it's Dak Prescott for $6,900. I'm not worried about what happened last week in his first game back off injury. Vegas is not worried either, evidently. Dallas has the highest implied total of the entire week at 31.75 points. At home against a bad Falcons defense. Atlanta 28th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. Also sounds like Dak will get Michael Gallup back this week for the first time since week one. So it's a classic bounce back spot for the entire offense. So like him as a high price guy. If you want to save money at quarterback, I like Carson Wentz for $5,900. He's been productive. 2+ touchdowns in 6 straight games now, 3+ scores in 3 straight games. He has 20+ DK points in 4 of those last 6 games now. Hasn't dipped below 17 DraftKings points in any of those games. And he gets the Jags defense. We talked about him last week with Josh Allen. That obviously did not work out, but I still think this is one of, if not the worst pass defenses in the NFL.
Yes, and I do want to save salary and go down to Carson Wentz, so that's who I have down. Jaguars, a top 10 QB scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, even with the boost that Josh Allen gave them last week. And really, it was just a goofy, bad game for Josh Allen. He looked terrible, and he was probably pressing by the end of that because he couldn't believe how far they were behind the Jaguars. And, I mean, they were playing up to credit them for the effort. But before that game against the Bills, the previous 2 Jaguars outings were 3 total touchdowns to Geno Smith and a 329-2 passing day to Tua Tagovailoa in London. So we're going to go ahead and assume it's still a positive matchup. And like you said, the numbers on Carson Wentz have been very good. I do like the salary savings to stay down there and use that elsewhere, even though we're going to find options at other positions that will help us, maneuver however we choose. I think if you prefer Matt Ryan to Carson Wentz at 6,000, that's fine. He's in play as well. I would probably roll with Wentz in my cash lineups over him, though. I think on the GPP side, Wentz is also in play. But if I'm spending up there and I'm more willing to, I like Tom Brady as our highest projected quarterback on the main slate. He's just 6th in projected ownership according to Fanshare right now. We'll see if that changes at all, but I don't see why it would with the questions about Chris Godwin. And, we'll wait and see Sunday if Chris Godwin's available. But Tyler Johnson at 3,300. Cameron Brate at 2,700 offer salary savings to make it easier to fit Brady and Mike Evans into a lineup. And you're going to have Mike Evans if you have Tom Brady in your lineup. So I think all that together, plus the matchup, Washington is 10th in run defense DVOA, according to Football Outsiders this season, 31st against the pass, and worst as a fantasy adjusted, or as a defense adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So it's a great spot for Tom Brady, even if Chris Godwin can't go.
Yeah, I have Brady down here too. I guess I maybe shouldn't be surprised at the projected ownership because of those wide receiver injuries and the injury to Rob Gronkowski. I still think Brady can, throw 3-4 touchdowns in this matchup, even without those guys. So I like him. I'm going to mention Justin Herbert again. Last week he had his 3rd game of 30+ DraftKings points this season. So he has that tournament winning upside. He gets his Vikings pass defense that's been mediocre most of the season. The Vikings have a ton of injuries. Patrick Peterson is on IR. Danielle Hunter is out for the year. They're one of their best pass rushers. Linebacker Anthony Barr is out for this game. Defensive tackle Michael Pierce is out for this game. I mean, that's more of a matchup upgrade for Austin Eckler, but it's not going to hurt Justin Herbert either. Cornerback Rashad Breeland is questionable. Harrison Smith, or safety, is still on the COVID list as of now. I don't know if he's going to be back. So it's a great matchup for Herbert. And he's coming in with kind of just middling ownership. So I'm going to be on him again for tournaments.
Yeah, Harrison Smith went on the COVID list last Sunday morning, so he's still going to be on it through this game. He'll be out. His backup played well last week, but that's definitely weakens the defense. The Chargers have some questions on defense as well. We don't know whether safety Nasir Adderley is going to play. Joey Bosa's questionable, even though they expect him to play, but he sat out Friday with an ankle issue. So that could be a high-scoring matchup. It definitely looks like a spot for some fantasy goodness, and one that I'll highlight on the FanDuel side of things as well. Anybody else from quarterback before we move on?
Nope.
Running back for cash, it's really going to be tough to avoid the injury fill-ins this week for how cheap they are and really how relatively safe of bets they are for touches. Dearness Johnson, 4,700. Mark Ingram, 4,500. I often I'll shy away from the 4K running backs that are going to end up being so chalky, but the spending room they give you and the virtual certainty that these guys are going to get, backfield controlling touch counts with Alvin Kamara out, with Nick Chubb out, it's going to be impossible for me to build a cash lineup without at least one of these guys in it.
Yeah, to me, Dearness Johnson is like the must play in cash. And I like him over Ingram just because I think at this point in their careers, Johnson's probably the better running back. But more than that, it's just I trust the Browns offense and their running game and their O-line more than I do Ingram. Ingram's a great play at his price. The only reason he's not a must for me is there's just a lot of good running back plays this week. So I mentioned with the quarterbacks, whether you want to spend up to Dak or go down to Wentz. To me, that depends on if you want to play both Dearness Johnson and Ingram plus one expensive running back, or if you want to play Dearness Johnson with two expensive running backs. The two expensive running backs I'm looking at, Dalvin Cook, $8,000. We talked about this Chargers defense quite a bit so far this season. They're just a run funnel defense. They invite teams to run. The Chargers have faced a league high 26.8 running back carries per game this season. They're also dead last in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA, giving up 4.9 yards per carry. So teams are running a lot on the Chargers, and they're running successfully on the Chargers. Now you get match up with Dalvin Cook, a Vikings team that wants to run the ball with him is kind of the base of their offense. So great spot for Dalvin Cook. And then Najee Harris as well for $7,900 just for the volume he's been getting, and now he's at home against the Lions. He's kind of tough to pass on. So again, if you play Carson Wentz, you can play Dalvin Cook and Najee Harris, and then use Dearness Johnson in that third running back spot.
Yeah, I like the idea of Carson Wentz, both of those both of those expensive running backs, Dalvin Cook, Najee Harris, and then either of the cheap guys in the lineup. And, certainly mixing and matching for different lineup builds, but that's the way I think I'm going to start out things on the cash side, and we'll get to the wideouts that can fit in. For GPP, Deandre Swift at 6,800. I think we bring him up pretty much every show, especially on DK, but he's still not projected for super high ownership because there are so many attractive running back plays this week. We've got no Jamal Williams again this week, which can only help the touch count for DeAndre Swift. And we like him, of course, because he's more game script proof than other running backs. If things go surprisingly well for Detroit, then they're probably going to be handing it to DeAndre Swift. If things go poorly, they're probably going to be throwing to DeAndre Swift, which is going to happen either way. He's got 4 straight games of 17-plus touches, 5-plus receptions in each of those contests. I love the touch upside for Swift at that price.
Yeah, and I know he dudded last time out without Jamal Williams. I'm not worried about that, and I'm still convinced that no Jamal Williams is good news for DeAndre Swift. So I like him for tournaments. I'm going to be playing Dearness Johnson in tournaments despite the ownership. I'm going to be playing plenty of Dalvin Cook and Najee Harris. The other expensive running back that's kind of going to be lower owned I like for tournaments is Aaron Jones. That's assuming we get Aaron Rodgers back for this game. We'll find that out tomorrow, Saturday afternoon. If that's the case, though, I kind of like investing in this Packers offense that, they didn't have Devonta Adams 2 games ago. They didn't have Aaron Rodgers last week. If they get the band back together on Sunday against a pretty bad Seattle defense. Seattle's been especially bad against running backs in the passing game. They've allowed the 4th most running back catches and the 2nd most running back receiving yards. And we know Jones can do damage there.
We talked about the 4K running backs. Brandon Bolden, if you look at the DS lineup generator, Brandon Bolden's right there with him. I don't think he's really a good enough bet for touches to be in the cash discussion. And we're going to have to watch and see first if Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson are out. They're both questionable, but it sure seems like they're trending to not playing after not practicing at all this week with their concussions. I think on the GPP side, Brandon Bolden gets more interesting. And at 4,400, maybe he disappoints us on touches. Maybe he gets 10 targets. I think anything in that range is possible. And it's also possible that he gets a larger share of the carries than JJ Taylor does, although I think JJ Taylor would be in the mix there.
Yes, I would not trust the Patriots backfield in cash, but I think Bolden is an interesting pivot off of Johnson and Ingram in tournaments. The other guy down there that is like a pivot for tournaments is Devin Singletary if Zach Moss is out. And it does sound like Moss has a chance to play. He was limited in practice today. He's listed as questionable. But if he's out, you're going to get 15 to 20 touches, I think, out of Devin Singletary against the Jets. So he'd be a nice play if you want to get off Johnson and or Mark Ingram.
And one more that's just kind of in a nebulous range there is Michael Carter at $5,600. Mike White is back. Of course, Carter had 8 and 9 catches in Mike White's 2 games so far, the one where he relieved Zach Wilson and then his start. 23 total targets in those 2 contests. The Bills have seen the league's fewest running back receptions this year, but they sit just in the middle of the league in running back coverage DVOA. They're going to be without middle linebacker Tremaine Edmonds this week. He's not very good in coverage, but that can't mean that the guy behind him is excellent in coverage. Otherwise, I think we'd see a little bit less Tremaine Edmonds on the field. So the one question with Carter, or I guess the biggest question I have with Carter, is the gap between him and Ty Johnson in routes closed last week. It was basically even between them. The previous 2 games have been almost 2-1 in favor of Michael Carter. So we'll see if that was a one-game thing or if it continues that way. I do think, though, for our purposes here, it doesn't matter all that much because there's room for Carter to get receptions even on the amount that he played last week.
Yeah, and we haven't even mentioned James Conner, who I think is a really strong play. So, again, there's more options at running back this week than I think there's been all season.
Yes, because a lot of the guys that are missing or injured or, playing Sunday night or already played and all that. So, yeah, it's an easier week than usual to find running backs that you can get behind. Wide receivers for cash, Jared, what are you playing?
Devonta Adams is just too cheap at $7,900. Again, assuming Aaron Rodgers is back. Adams opened the season at $8,300. He got up to $9,000 at one point. I think Adams with Aaron Rodgers should be like a mid-eights type of wide receiver. So I think he's a value, and he's obviously a safe cash game play. Deontay Johnson is the next receiver I'm playing in cash at $6,800. I mean, already averaging 9.9 targets per game. And now Chase Claypool is also out alongside Juju Smith-Schuster. So I think, Deontay is as good a bet as any wide receiver on this slate for targets, and he's just $6,800. And then the salary saver, you mentioned him, Tyler Johnson, $3,300. Obviously a better play if Chris Godwin is out, but even if Godwin plays, I mean, Johnson is basically a full-time receiver for Tampa, with all their 3 wide receiver sets. And if Godwin plays, there's also a chance he's limited or exits early. So I think Johnson makes a lot of sense to save money in cash.
Yes, I think Johnson's in play whether Godwin plays or not. And he's the easy choice in that 3K range. I think there are more attractive 3K wideouts than usual this week. Usually it's like, well, maybe this guy can do something. I'm not going to really feel comfortable using him. This week, there are 3 guys that I think are a bit more on the comfy side. It's never comfortable, but, comfy for a 3K receiver. But Tyler Johnson, I think, is the easiest choice among those guys for cash. And then we'll talk about others on the GPP side. I think there's a lot to like in that 6K range that you already got to with Deontay Johnson. There's Michael Pittman at 6,300. There's DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett in that range. Tyler Lockett's a little cheaper than Metcalf. The Packers could be weakened at corner. They're already without Jair Alexander. They might miss Eric Stokes for this game as well. So, prefer Lockett at the savings, but I think both he and Metcalf are in play here. And then Mike Evans is not quite down there, but he's down $100 in salary versus last week, just 9th in price among main slate wide receivers. So he's relatively cheap, especially in a week where he's as good a bet for targets as he ever will be, and is facing that defense that is the league's best matchup for wide receiver scoring.
Yeah, if you play 2 of those cheap running backs, you can use Devonta Adams, Mike Evans, and Deontay Johnson as your 3 wide receivers. So that's definitely a viable option in cash.
Yeah, even more than most weeks, I think it'll be a week to play around with all the builds and build a bunch of lineups and see what you like the best for entering the specific tournaments and specific contests, I guess I should say. GPP side, I think that whole 6K crew is in play here as well. You mix and match and see what you like. I'm starting it off with the Mike Evans, Tom Brady stack because I like the low projected ownership on Brady versus his upside. I like Mike Evans's price, and I like the other guys that you can mix in with it to kind of differentiate. Because I think Mike Evans will probably wind up fairly highly owned by the time we get to Sunday. AJ Brown is also interesting at 7,800 here. I don't think that his ownership is going to climb because there are just too many options, especially at lower salaries. And the matchup isn't awesome, but the Saints are the number one run defense in DVOA. They're 10th, I believe, in pass defense. So, a little bit better for the passing game. And A.J. Brown is just A.J. Brown. He's seen 11 targets in 2 straight games. He's the number one wideout. He's a beast when he's on. The Titans leaned more toward the pass in neutral situations last week without Derrick Henry. So maybe we get even a little bit more of that this week if they don't jump out to a huge lead.
Yeah, 34% target share for Brown over the last 4 games. Now, Julio Jones, questionable again after seemingly hurting his hamstring again on Thursday. So Brown's going to dominate targets. Saints also are going to be without Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who is their primary slot corner. Brown's been playing in the slot more the past couple of weeks. It seems like that's a change the Titans have made to try to get him going, get their passing game going. So matchup upgrade for Brown there. He's priced so high up there at 7,800. I do think his ownership is probably going to be lower than it would be, if he was, kind of priced more like where he's ranked in most places. So I like that call. I like the DK Metcalf call. I mean, $6,800. That feels to me like he's still priced as if Geno Smith is under center, and we know we're getting Russell Wilson back. So Metcalf feels underpriced. I'm going to play Mike Williams this week with Justin Herbert. And Williams has really, for the most part, just been bad for the past 5 games now. He's disappointed, but Minnesota, we talked about all the wide receiver or all the defensive injuries. They are already 26th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. And if you look at the big games they've given up to wideouts, they've been to Mike Williams types, like, bigger outside wide receivers, Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf, CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper. Both those guys went for over 100 yards. So, Williams is the type of receiver that the Vikings have struggled against this season.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, they're stronger up the middle of their defense than they are out on the edges. So, yeah, I like Mike Williams for this week. I also want to throw out Jerry Judy as an upside play. 22.2% of the target share in his 2 games back from IR. The Eagles have allowed the league's highest completion rate at 75.5%, but not overly generous on deep balls. So, that plus Teddy Bridgewater, I think, favors Jerry Judy, who's working on an ADOT that's several yards shorter than what Tim Patrick and Cortland Sutton have. So I like the chances that Jerry Judy gets targets here and produces on them. And I mentioned the 3K range pivots, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, James Washington, again, not guys that make you feel comfy, but certainly guys that you could envision seeing 6 targets this week and doing something.
Yeah, definitely.
Tight end for cash. What do you like, Jared?
Dan Arnold, $3,500. He's getting, among the last 4 games, he's 3rd among tight ends in targets, 3rd in catches, 5th in receiving yards, 7th in PPR points, and he's $3,500. And this matchup is good. The Colts much stronger against the run than the pass. They're 20th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings, 31st in adjusted points allowed to tight end. So, it's pretty easy for me in cash. It's Dan Arnold. I think he's the best value at the position.
Yeah, he 7+ targets in 3 of his 4 full games with the Jaguars and has hit 60 receiving yards in each of those games. So, yeah, I like Dan Arnold up top too. And there's lots to like in the 3K range here. Tyler Conklin, Pat Freiermuth, both under 4,000 as well. They top our DK dollars per point projections. Ricky Seals-Jones is also in the mix. I mean, I guess I don't need to get to him in cash if I have Dan Arnold for even cheaper, but Logan Thomas not yet ready. Ricky Seals-Jones at $3,700. That range, that whole group of guys, not only in play for cash, but also on the GPP side. And that might be where pivoting away from Dan Arnold makes sense because he looks like he's headed for high ownership after the numbers he's put up lately.
Yeah. And, not that he has to go for like 20 in the tournament, but he doesn't have exciting upside to me, just, playing on that Jags offense. So I do think Arnold is probably a good fade in tournaments. There's some guys beneath him. I like you mentioned Cameron Brate. OJ Howard's the same price. And Cam Brate has run more pass routes than Howard in every game that Rob Gronkowski has missed. So, Brate, might be the better bet. I also think Howard is still just a more exciting pass catching talent, might have the higher ceiling. But I think either of those Bucs guys are in play with all their wide receiver injuries. Even cheaper, Gerald Everett is $2,600. Again, he's getting Russell Wilson back. His routes have been climbing each of the last 3 games. He was up to 78% of the routes in Seattle's last game, and the Packers are 27th in adjusted points allowed to tight end. So, I think all 3 of those super cheap guys are in play for tournaments.
Yes, I agree with that. I think if you're going the other way, because we saved salary elsewhere, TJ Hawkinson at 5,500 is attractive because there aren't top shelf options available at tight end this week. I mean, Kyle Pitts is there. TJ Hawkinson looks like he's going to come in at a much lower ownership rate than Kyle Pitts. There's no Travis Kelce. There's no George Kittle. There's no Mark Andrews this week. Hawkinson has seen 9+ targets in 3 straight games, 11 targets in 2 of those. So you love the volume for this full PPR site. If he happens to reach 100 yards, obviously he stands a better chance of doing that if he's getting 11 targets than other guys who are getting 6. So, that's in play. And the Steelers are just middle of the league in tight end coverage DVOA. So it's not a scary matchup for him at all.
Yeah, I like that call. Dawson Knox, I think, is interesting too, in a tournament only, obviously, in his first game off of injury. But just $4,500. He already has 2 games of 20+ DraftKings points. He is a touchdown scorer in that offense, and has a good matchup against the Jets. So risky, but for tournaments, I think he has the upside we're looking for.
Yeah, I have him down for FanDuel, so we'll be talking more about him in a few minutes. On to defense, Jared. There's not a ton that I like down in the cheap range. I think if I'm trying to stay cheap, the Panthers are attractive at 2,400 against Arizona, mostly for the savings. They do bring a better pass rush than the 49ers did last week against Colt McCoy, so I don't think that we're going to get a huge Colt McCoy game. Maybe we'll get another huge James Conner game, but the Panthers at least have, I think, more upside on defense than the 49ers do. I'll be a bit less interested if Brian Burns or defensive end doesn't play. He's questionable, but he did finish the week with a full Friday practice at least after having Mac Jones twist his ankle last week.
Yeah, and we'll have to see about all the Cardinals injuries. We know Chase Edmonds is out, but Kyler Murray, DeAndre Hopkins, Rondell Moore, all listed as questionable. But the Panthers are where I'm leaning for cash games. I just think they're a pretty good defense, and this is gonna, it's a banged up Cardinals offense, even if those guys end up playing. So I think they're relatively safe for cash games at that price.
Yeah, I think the Titans at 2,600 against the Saints are also in play. They seem to be headed for higher ownership after that Rams game on Monday night. I think that could come into play if you're looking at a 50-50 build. Maybe you go for the Panthers at lower ownership. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. I think both of those are in play. And then, if the salary is there are plenty of options in the 3K range. If the cheapies at those other positions just leave me money that I can spend on defense.
Yeah, Cardinals at 3,700, the Bucs at 3,500. Those, I think, stand out as the best plays to me. The slightly sneakier one, the Cowboys at 3,000. Going to be a shootout. I think Atlanta probably puts points on the board, but I also think Atlanta probably ends up throwing it 40, 45 times in that game. That gives the Cowboys chances to get sacks, to get picks. They've been an opportunistic defense all season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly can't argue with that. And that's going to do it for the Week 10 DraftKings podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to get more player recommendations. If you're a DS Insider, you can check out Jared's cash game picks, as well as top GPP options from Corey Bushland. You can also mess around with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and FanShare ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free DraftSharks Discord. You can find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. If you are with us on the stream, stick around. We're going to take a brief break and then fire up the FanDuel side of things. For Jared Small and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Shaw saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, November 12th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 10 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And this podcast is sponsored by our partners at Fanshare Sports. Fanshare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com. And you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at FanshareSports.com. If you're watching on the stream right now, sorry, I didn't make it back before the halftime video finished. I got a sick son in the other room, so I was checking on him and forgot exactly how long the halftime video was. But I'm back now. We're going to do the FanDuel side. Jared, quarterback, what are you playing for cash?
I'm going to trust our projections and just go with Josh Allen, who comes in as the top dollars per point value at quarterback, $8,700, obviously coming off a total dud last week against Jacksonville. I mean, that was his first game all season with fewer than 17 FanDuel points. He had 21 plus FanDuel points in each of his previous 5 games. I think he bounces back here against the Jets. Josh Allen gets tight end Dawson Knox back. He's going to get right tackle Spencer Brown back. I thought the pass protection was the biggest issue in that game against Jacksonville. Allen was just under constant pressure. Getting Brown back should help. I think the Jets pass rush probably even worse than Jacksonville's. I just think the Bills offense bounces back. I'll play Allen in cash.
Yeah, I was going to say playing the Jets also helps with that issue. So not too big a threat there. I'm not arguing against playing Josh Allen. I think I'll probably lean more toward Tom Brady at $8,300, just cheaper than Josh Allen. So that gives me some salary savings to spend elsewhere. Facing the top scoring matchup for quarterbacks by our adjusted fantasy points allowed in Washington. Of course, I mentioned Washington is better in run defense, not scary in run defense, but better. So maybe that pushes things toward the passing side a little bit. And I'm not too worried about Chris Godwin, even if he misses this game, draining Tom Brady's value. I think there's enough left for Tom Brady to score, especially for a cash lineup. I think he's got a higher floor than Dak Prescott. I'm not worried about Dak coming off last week's game, but there's a chance that they keep the volume down. And I guess there is at least a chance that he has another rocky game like he did last week. So I think there's more of a chance that Dak Prescott doesn't get where I want him to than Tom Brady does. I do think Justin Herbert is also in play here, $300 cheaper than Tom Brady. I wonder whether Keenan Allen's knee issue is a potential drag. I mean, it's at least a risk factor that we're introducing here.
Yeah, we haven't heard much about Keenan. He got in 2 limited practices this week, and he's listed as questionable. The fact that we haven't heard anything makes me think it's probably just nothing, and he'll be fine. But we'll see about that. But I'm sticking with these higher-priced quarterbacks in tournaments. I like Dak Prescott. I like Tom Brady. Love Justin Herbert. I'll run down the Vikings injuries again. I talked about him on the DraftKings show, but Patrick Peterson is on IR. They're going to be they're without Daniil Hunter for the season now. Linebacker Anthony Barr is out of this game. Defensive tackle Michael Pierce is out of this game. Cornerback Brashad Breeland is questionable. Harrison Smith is out on the COVID list. So just a ton of injuries on this Vikings defense. That was just sort of mediocre to begin with. So I expect Herbert to take advantage and have a big game.
Even my boy Kenny Willekes is on the COVID list now. He tested positive. So, yeah, lots of guys missing and defenders missing on the Chargers side as well. Nasir Adderley might be out. He's questionable. Is heading for a game-time decision. Joey Bosa's questionable. They say he'll play, but he probably going to be somewhere short of 100%. And also some changes at linebacker. Drew Tranquill is out. He's on the COVID list. Kenneth Murray is back from IR. His playing time was down before he went on IR because he had been disappointing. So, I mean, overall, it's weakened defenses against offenses that have guys capable of exploiting even fully healthy defenses on both sides. So we've seen the line climb in this game. It's now the second highest over-under for the week, 53.5 points. So I think this game's just intriguing all around. I think both quarterbacks are in play. Justin Herbert would be my first choice, but Kirk Cousins is going to be a lot lower owned than Justin Herbert here. Dalvin Cook obviously is exciting on the other side of a Justin Herbert lineup. There's wide receivers from both sides, run backs. There are even tight ends to consider from both teams here. So there's a lot to play with. And I think that if we are playing Justin Herbert, I like Mike Williams as the primary wide receiver to stack with him. He's slightly cheaper than Keenan Allen, projected for about 1/3 of the ownership. And like I mentioned, the knee issue, even if Keenan Allen plays, even if he plays all the way through the game, there's at least the question that maybe he hits it wrong at some point, has to come out early, is limited, whatever, it's some risk. And I do think that it's also in play to put both of those wideouts into the game with Justin Herbert.
Definitely. And I think Jared Cook and Austin Eckler are always stacking options with Herbert as well.
Mm-hmm. On to running back here, Jared. What do you like for cash?
Yeah, so I'm going to play two cheap running backs on FanDuel here. Dearness Johnson and Mark Ingram, both, getting vaulted into starting spots this week with Nick Chubb on the COVID list. And Demetric Felton and John Kelly are out of this game too. So it's Dearness Johnson and Brian Hill, who was just signed earlier this week. Those are the Browns' only available running backs for this game. So you could see Dearness Johnson get every single running back touch for the Browns on Sunday. He looked good in that spot start against the Broncos, running behind one of the best O-lines in the game. And then Mark Ingram starting in place of Alvin Kamara, who has been ruled out. It's Dwayne Washington behind him. Ty Montgomery is questionable for the Saints. He's been playing mostly wide receiver anyways this season. So Ingram, should get 15 to 20 touches in this game. It's a pretty good matchup against Tennessee. And Trevor Siemian targeted running backs on 29% of his passes last week. That was with Kamara in the game, obviously. So I'm not expecting it to be that high, but he was checking it down quite a bit. So I think Ingram could be busy in the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, he also threw 5 targets to Mark Ingram in that game. That's how much I respect him, apparently. So yeah, it's tough not to like Mark Ingram. Usually when a starter goes down, we're like, well, we expect this guy to get the touches, but we'll see how it goes. In these two cases, how can it not go heavily to Dearness Johnson and Mark Ingram? That's what makes them so attractive, is they're going to get the ball, at least as good a bet as anybody else in the situations could be. Brian Hill, does he just materialize when a team runs out of running backs? Because I don't have any idea where he was before this, ever since Tennessee this summer, where he got hurt and disappeared.
I think it was that. I think it was Tennessee. Then he was unemployed for a bit, and now he's back.
Yeah, there you go. You run out of running backs, and you just you're like, what are we going to do? And then all of a sudden there's a knock from Brian Hill on the door, and he's got light shining from behind him. I think the big difference here in playing those two cheap running backs is that Najee Harris was right with Dalvin Cook in price on DraftKings. He's up at 9,400 on FanDuel. So still in play, but he's $900 more than Dalvin Cook. And you just have to wonder whether it's worth it to get all the way up to Najee Harris there.
Yeah, to me, the third running back spot is between Cook, who gets this matchup against the Chargers that, we've been attacking all season, and then James Conner, who has $7,000 here on FanDuel. 21 carries and 5 targets last week after Chase Edmonds exited on his very first touch of that game. I don't know if you're banking on another 26 opportunities for Conner, but I do think, he's a good bet for 20 of them with, Eno Benjamin as the guy behind him now. Gets a decent matchup here too. Carolina 19th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. So, $7,000. I think Conner is going to be more than that as we, continue to get games with Chase Edmonds out.
Yeah, and certainly an offense that's either going to have an ailing Kyler Murray or Colt McCoy is only going to be further motivated to give James Conner the ball. So yeah, easy to like him this week. For that Dalvin Cook matchup, the Chargers have allowed the 4th most half PPR points to running backs on the season. So a great spot for him. GPP, I do think James Conner, Dearness Johnson, Mark Ingram are all still in play. It becomes a little bit less attractive because of the high ownership rates, but if a guy hits, he hits, no matter if 35% of the field has him or 10% has him. So I'm not going to fade any of those guys, but I will also throw in DeAndre Swift on this side at $7,300. Usually mentioned that he's less attractive in half PPR than full PPR, but he's going to get the touches whether they're on the ground or through the air, and receptions are still worth more in half PPR than carries are. So 4 straight games of 17 plus touches for Swift. 5+ receptions in each of those 4 games. No Jamal Williams once again. That can only help his touch count. And DeAndre Swift is 11th among running backs in half PPR scoring for the year. 4 of the guys ahead of him in those rankings are not available on this slate, so he climbs even higher. Should be busy regardless of game flow here against the Steelers.
Yeah, I had Swift down here too, so I like that call. The other guy I have is Leonard Fournette, $7,400. I don't think the Bucs are going to, go hand it off 35 times in this game, but they might lean on the run a bit more with their wide receiver injuries and Rob Gronkowski still out. Not a great on paper matchup for Fournette. Washington's been pretty good against the run, but if we expect the Bucs to score 30+ points, Fournette could easily just stumble into 1 or 2 of those touchdowns.
Yeah, and I mean, even if the Bucs don't lean run, they're going to run it some, and they're going to have scoring opportunities. So it's tough to not like Leonard Fournette. Are you looking at his ownership rate at all when you're setting up tournament teams?
Yeah, I see him at 16% here. I don't buy he's going to be that high on FanDuel. Maybe on DraftKings, but I don't know. I don't totally buy it. I think he'll be single digits on FanDuel.
I don't know. I think you look at the slate and he looks like as good a touchdown bet as just about anybody short of Dalvin Cook. So I could see him being up high, especially at the way he produced over the past few games before their bye last week.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'm not the ownership expert, so maybe we should just trust Fancher.
There you go. We'll see about that on Sunday morning too, because things tend to change quite a bit throughout the weekend. Wide receiver for cash. What are you playing?
I mean, Mike Evans and AJ Brown just stick out to me. I think they're both underpriced. Evans at $7,400 with Antonio Brown out, Rob Gronkowski out, Chris Godwin is questionable. He's a game time decision. Evans should see double-digit targets against Washington, who is dead last in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So great spot for Evans. And then AJ Brown, just $200 more at $7,600. He's already averaging 10 targets per game over the last 4. Julio Jones might miss this game again. Tennessee, I think, is going to be throwing it more with Derrick Henry out. So I think Brown is also a good bet for 10 plus targets in this game against the Saints. The Saints 29th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers, and they're going to be without their slot corner, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, on Sunday.
Yeah, we already like Mike Evans and AJ Brown plenty as players. They're both situated in spots where they should be even better bets for targets than they are normally. Maybe Mike Evans can have another one of those games where he scores multiple touchdowns and gives away a valuable football to somebody that's worth a Bitcoin and season tickets. Tyler Lockett at 7,100, I think, is also in play. $900 cheaper than DK Metcalf on FanDuel. Metcalf and Lockett are both among the top 12 wideouts in yards per route run on the season, despite losing Russell Wilson for a while. So getting Russell Wilson back can only help that area. And, again, $900 difference between Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf for this game. Deontay Johnson, 7,400. Michael Pittman, 7,200. I think also in play. An interesting range with those 7K wide receivers. And, another reason for me to not want to get up to Najee Harris, but to rather focus on getting more of those wide receivers into my lineup.
Yep, agreed.
GPP, what do you like?
Yeah, I like both the Seahawks wide receivers, Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. With Russell Wilson back now, we know the Packers are still without their top corner, Jair Alexander. Eric Stokes is questionable, their rookie corner for this game. So good matchup for both the Seahawks wideouts. And then Mike Williams, has disappointed recently, but I think this is a good spot for him to get back on track. The Vikings 26th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. You look at the receivers that have had big games against them: Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf, CeeDee Lamb. Bigger outside receivers like Mike Williams. Minnesota has also been targeted 20 plus yards downfield at the 3rd highest rate in the league. So teams have been taking deep shots against the Vikings, and that's still Mike Williams' role on this Chargers offense.
Mm-hmm. This week, with all of the options at wide receiver and all those guys in that same price range, it looks like we're going to be able to get Mike Williams and Justin Jefferson at low ownership rates. And I mean, those are some exciting players to be able to get at low ownership with either quarterback from that matchup. Justin Jefferson's at $7,500. I mentioned he's projected for single-digit ownership right now. There's been some chatter this week about getting him more targets, which I don't know exactly where it generated from, but it can't be a bad thing when that is out there, when people are asking Justin Jefferson about whether he should get more targets. It can't hurt the chances of him getting those. And the target counts haven't been terrible. I mean, it was down last week because they barely threw anything to anybody in a game where they just didn't have the ball that much. So love the upside on those guys anytime. I love being able to put Mike Williams and Justin Jefferson, in a correlated lineup with quarterbacks that look good. So they're going to be certainly in play for GPP lineups. And then, of course, that Tom Brady, Mike Evans stack. I mean, there might even be room to put Tom Brady, Mike Evans, and then Justin Jefferson and Mike Williams without playing one of the quarterbacks from that game.
Yeah, I like the Jefferson call. And you mentioned some of the injuries the Chargers have in their secondary. They've been a tough wide receiver defense most of the season, but they gave up that big game to Devonta Smith last week, I think, at least in part because of those injuries to their cornerbacks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've got a safety that might not play. They've got one of their corners that's out for this game. So, yeah, there are injuries to exploit here. Anything else at wideout?
No.
On to tight end for cash, and it's probably the same dude as it was on DraftKings, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Dan Arnold pops as the top dollars per point value for $5,100. He's not as clear a play for me on FanDuel here as on DraftKings. One, he's just better on a full PPR site like DraftKings. That's kind of why you're playing him, is for the volume and for the catches. And 2, he's just not as big a discount from some of these top guys. Like, Kyle Pitts for only $1,800 more. I would at least mess around with the lineup and see if you can get up to Pitts instead of Arnold. Pitts has 10, 6, and 7 targets in the 3 games without Calvin Ridley. He's 4th among all tight ends in expected fantasy points per game over those 3. Dallas 32nd in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. Kind of applies to Pitts, kind of doesn't though because he lines up outside so much. I think he's probably going to see quite a bit of Trevon Diggs in this game, which will be a fun matchup. But it's a matchup I think Pitts can win plenty of. So it's either save the money with Arnold or go up to Pitts for me in cash.
Yeah, Trevon Diggs is graded out poorly in coverage by a PFF lately as well, and has been dealing with an ankle sprain at various points. So it wouldn't necessarily be a matchup that favors the Cowboys there. But yeah, I like Kyle Pitts, and it's easier to get to the higher priced guys here because, as you said, the discount is not as large as on DraftKings, and the pricing is never as tight. So we can do kind of what we want over here. TJ Hawkinson also in play at 6,500 for similar reasons, as good a bet for target volume as anybody at the position. Around Dan Arnold, and we're kind of shifting to the GPP side here, but Dan Arnold's in play at 5,100, but around him as well are Pat Freiermuth and Tyler Conklin, and those guys might be even better bets for touchdowns, which we especially like over here where we don't get full PPR scoring. So I think those guys are in play. And then one more 5K tight end that I'm looking at here is Dawson Knox at 5,800 for the Bills. He's back from his hand injury. He has scored the 4th most half PPR points per game among tight ends, and the 3 guys ahead of him are not available on this main slate. So he is the top scoring half PPR tight end in points per game on this main slate. Now he gets a Jets defense that's adding 10% to tight end scoring according to our adjusted fantasy points allowed. So nice spot for him to be returning to.
Yep, I like the Knox call. I got another beef with Fanshare here, though. Is Dan Arnold really going to be twice as owned as Pat Freiermuth at the same price? Like, people just saw Freiermuth score twice on in a primetime game. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I think sometimes it's tough to differentiate the ownership between DraftKings and FanDuel. Sometimes those numbers look very similar. I would be surprised if he's at the same level on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he's up there because of the targets that we talk about with him. I mean, I think he's attractive at that price and as one of the top couple of receivers among Jaguars.
Yeah, that's fair. One more tight end to mention, Dalton Schultz. $6,000, really for me, just a play to get another piece of this Cowboys offense. And I think Schultz is a good touchdown bet in this game. It's kind of always what we're looking for on FanDuel.
Yeah, it's like if you want to play Dak Prescott, but you want to play another quarterback more, then maybe you play Dalton Schultz at tight end to get a piece of Dak Prescott.
Yep.
Over to defense, Jared. What are you favoring?
The Bucks come in as our top dollars per point value here for $4,400 against Washington. I mean, I think you're going to get 50 Taylor Heineke dropbacks in this game, so lots of upside for that Bucks defense. We've seen them have some big games this season, including that one against Justin Fields.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be living on the Bucks defense here. The Washington has allowed 9 sacks over just the past 2 games. They had allowed a lot less than that before, but not a good way to come into a matchup with the Bucks. And the Bucks are just 7th on main slate in price. So I mean, we'd love to get a 3K defense in, but 4,400 is not expensive for the Bucks in the matchup that they have this weekend. I think if you really do need to save salary or want to for whatever you're trying to build, the Lions at 3,100 are interesting because they get you all the way down and allow you to spend that somewhere else. And they're playing Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, I'm not expecting Detroit to win this game or Roethlisberger to throw a bunch of picks, but it's definitely possible that he has a rough throw or 7 in this game.
Yep. NED playing Big Ben is in play for tournaments this season.
Anything else on defense?
Nope.
That's going to do it for this Week 10 FanDuel podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to get more player recommendations. Kevin English has your cash game picks for FanDuel. Corey Bushland has your top GPP options. Then you can play with the lineup generator to build your own lineups with the help of the DS projections and FanShare ownership projections. For more discussion of DFS and other formats, you can also join the free DraftSharks Discord. You can find the link to do that in the description for this podcast. For Jared Small and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.